When we usually talk about the profile of a domestic terrorist, there's a script we unconsciously follow. We expect a story of disenfranchisement, maybe a history of petty crime, usually someone drifting on the fringes of society with limited options.
Right.
Generally do not expect the profile to read child prodigy, Harvard undergrad at 16, PhD from the University of Michigan, and the youngest assistant professor in the history of the UC Berkeley mathematics department.
It sounds like the resume for a Nobel Prize winner or a tech CEO, not a man who died in a supermax prison cell known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies.
Exactly. Today, we are unpacking the life of Ted Kaczynski. But I want to be very clear about the mission of this deep dive. We aren't here to just do a true crime timeline of the bombings.
No, the what has been covered so many times.
We've all seen the police sketch. The sunglasses, the hoodie. We know the what. I want to understand the how. How do you go from solving geometric function theory at the highest level of academia to living in a 10 by 12 shack in Montana without electricity or running water, mailing pipe bombs to computer store owners?
It is the ultimate question of transformation. And looking at the stack of documents we have today, the FBI files, the court psychiatric reports, the linguistic analysis, and Kaczynski's own 40,000 pages of journals, the answer is terrifyingly logical if you follow his internal reasoning.
It wasn't a snap decision.
Not at all. It was a slow, calculated slide from genius to nemesis.
Let's start with that genius label, because smart doesn't really cover it. We are talking about a statistical anomaly.
A profound anomaly. Theodore Kaczynski was born in 1942 in Chicago. His background was pretty standard, working-class Polish-American. His father was a sausage maker, his mother a homemaker.
Oh, a very normal middle American upbringing.
By all accounts, they were very civic-minded people who valued education above everything else, but Ted was different from the start.
I was reading that he was initially socially well-adjusted in elementary school, but then there was this specific administrative decision that changed his whole trajectory.
The grade skipping. It's a classic case of the educational system seeing a number and ignoring the human being attached to it.
What was the number?
He tested at an IQ of a 167.
Wow.
For context, 140 is generally considered the threshold for genius. 167 is it's off the charts. So the school administration looks at this and says, he's bored, let's challenge him, and they skip him past the 6th grade entirely.
Which, on paper, sounds like a victory for him. But socially,
it was a catastrophe. You take a socially awkward, smaller boy and drop him into a class of older, physically larger kids who are hitting puberty, forming cliques and dating, while he's still essentially a little boy interested in chemistry sets and coins.
He must have been a target.
A huge target. Kaczynski pointed at this later in his life as the precise moment he lost his social standing. He went from being a peer to being a mascot, or worse, a target for bullies. He was isolated, and he never really recovered that sense of belonging.
And that isolation seems to become his comfort zone. By high school, at Evergreen Park Community, he's not really trying to fit in anymore. He's part of the group called the Briefcase Boys.
It's a very vivid image, isn't it? A small clique of math and science obsessives who carried briefcases instead of backpacks.
A bit on the nose.
A bit, yeah. But even among them, Kaczynski was distant. One classmate famously described him as a walking brain. They said he wasn't really seen as a person, just a brain on legs.
That is incredibly dehumanizing for a teenager. To be reduced to just your intellect.
It is. But he leaned into it. If the world was going to value him only for his brain, he was going to make sure that brain was superior to everyone else's.
And he proved it.
He did. He graduated high school at 15. Think about that for a second. Most 15-year-olds are worrying about getting their learner's permit. Kaczynski is packing his bags for Cambridge, Massachusetts. He heads to Harvard at 16.
And this is where the narrative usually gets very dark. There's a specific chapter at Harvard that conspiracy theorists love, but the reality is actually disturbing enough without any embellishment. The Henry Murray study.
This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. So picture this. He's 16, living at 8 Prescott Street, which was housing for the youngest, most precocious students. He's vulnerable. He's away from home, and he's looking for approval,
And he signs up for what he thinks is a psychology study.
He signs up for an experiment run by Henry Murray. Now, Murray wasn't just some professor. He had worked with the OSS, the precursor to the CIA during World War II, on personality profiling. He was an expert in breaking people down.
And the pitch to the students was that they were going to debate philosophy, right? That sounds appealing to a young intellectual.
That was the cover story. The students were told, Write an essay detailing your deepest personal beliefs, your worldview, your philosophy of life. Kaczynski pours his heart out. He gives them the blueprint of his soul.
And then they use it against him.
They bring him into a room with bright lights and a camera, hook him up to electrodes to monitor his heart rate and sweating, and sit him across from a law student.
But the law student wasn't there to debate.
No, he was a Confederate, an actor instructed to psychologically destroy the subject. He took Kaczynski's essay and didn't just debate it, he mocked it.
Wow.
Murray himself called the attacks vehement, sweeping, and personally abusive. They used the boy's most cherished beliefs as ammunition to humiliate him. And then, and this is the kicker, they played the recording of the abuse back to him, so he had to watch himself being dismantled.
Over and over.
Over and over. This wasn't a one afternoon thing.
How long did this go on for?
Kaczynski endured this for 3 years, roughly 200 hours of participation. It was an induced stress experiment designed to break down a subject's ego defense mechanisms.
That sounds like torture. I mean, legally and ethically,
It's horrifying. And I know later on, Kaczynski's defense team tried to use this to argue that the government essentially created the Unabomber.
It's a very compelling narrative.
Yeah.
The CIA broke his mind, so he attacked the system.
It is. But here is the nuance that people often miss. Kaczynski hated that theory. He vehemently denied it. He said, and I'm quoting here, "I was confident that my experiences in the study had no significant effect on the course of my life."
That seems counterintuitive. Why would he deny something that could make him look like a victim and potentially save him from the death penalty?
Because Kaczynski valued his own agency above everything else. To admit that a Harvard psychologist broke him or brainwashed him would be to admit that he was weak or that his anti-technology philosophy wasn't his own genuine conclusion.
He wanted to own his actions.
He wanted to own his hatred. He wanted his worldview to be seen as the result of superior logic, not trauma.
So he survives Harvard, bruised but functioning. He goes to the University of Michigan for his master's and PhD. And this is where we really need to pause and understand the level of intellect we're dealing with. He wasn't just getting A's, he was rewriting the map of his field.
Literally. His field was geometric function theory. Specifically, he was working on boundary functions.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down. I know we aren't a math show, but what is a boundary function and why is it so hard?
So think of a mathematical function like a landscape or a map. Inside a certain circle, the rules of the landscape are smooth and predictable. You can calculate exactly where you are. But at the edge, the boundary things can get chaotic.
The rules break down.
The rules start to break down. It's like the edge of a cliff where the wind behaves differently, the ground is unstable. Kaczynski was studying what happens at that very edge where mathematical predictability dissolves into chaos.
Which feels incredibly metaphorical for his life, considering he was living on the edge of social norms.
It really does. His dissertation was so complex that a professor on his review committee, a guy named Maxwell Reed, said, "I would guess that maybe 10 or 12 men in the country could understand or appreciate it."
10 or 12 people.
In the entire country.
So he is effectively speaking a language only a dozen people on Earth speak.
Correct. He solved a problem that his professor had been unable to solve for years. He gets his PhD, and in 1967, UC Berkeley hires him. He is 25 years old.
The youngest assistant professor in their history.
He is on the tenure track at one of the most prestigious universities in the world. He has won the game. By every metric of the briefcase boys, he is the winner.
And 2 years later, he flips the table.
Resigns. Cold turkey. 1969.
Why? I mean, people don't just walk away from tenure track at Berkeley. That's a dream job.
He gave no explanation to the university. He just typed a letter and left. The department chair, John Addison, said it came quite out of the blue.
What was their take on him?
Addison noted that Kaczynski was pathologically shy, couldn't look students in the eye, and would just, read from the textbook. He hated the social performance of teaching.
But there was something else happening internally, a breaking point that occurred just before he left, which he calls the Phoenix moment.
Yes. This is the part that was buried in the psychiatric files for a long time, and I think it's really key to understanding the switch from withdrawal to aggression.
This goes back to his time at Michigan.
Yes. It dates back to his time at Michigan, specifically 1966. Kaczynski was experiencing intense sexual anxiety. He was lonely, frustrated, and deeply confused. And for weeks, he had these intense fantasies about being a female.
Okay.
He convinced himself that the solution to his misery, the only way out, was to undergo a sex change operation.
And he actually acted on this.
He did. He made an appointment. He walked into the university health center. He sat in the waiting room. He was going to tell the psychiatrist, I am a woman trapped in a man's body. But when his name was called, he froze.
He couldn't do it.
He lost his nerve. He couldn't say it. He lied and told the doctor he was just depressed about his grades or feeling anxious about classes, something generic.
And walking out of that office, realizing he couldn't even articulate his own desires. The shame must have been overwhelming.
It was, but then it transmuted. It turned into rage. He described it later as a moment of phoenix-like transformation. But instead of rising from the ashes with hope, he rose with hate.
Hate for who? For himself.
For the psychiatrist.
Exactly.
For the system. He wrote in his journal, I felt I wanted to kill that psychiatrist because the future looked utterly empty to me. I felt I wouldn't care if I died so long as I could kill that psychiatrist.
It's almost like he externalized the self-hatred. Instead of thinking, I am broken, he decided, the system that forces me to feel this way is broken.
Exactly. He pivoted from, I am a sexual deviant, to, I am a revolutionary. It was a psychological defense mechanism that solidified into a political ideology. He needed an enemy that wasn't himself.
So he quits Berkeley, he moves back home for a bit, and then in 1971, he heads to Lincoln, Montana. He buys a plot of land with his brother David, and he builds the cabin.
The famous 10 by 12 shack. It's important to visualize this. No electricity, no running water, a potbelly stove for heat. Just a wooden box against the world.
I think people romanticize this part. They think Walden Pond. They think of a peaceful writer's retreat. But this wasn't a cozy getaway.
No, it was grueling. He was living on about $400 a year, which he got from occasional odd jobs and support from his family.
What was he eating?
He ate rabbits, he shot, he grew vegetables, he dried meat. He was trying to achieve total autonomy. He wanted to prove that a human being didn't need the industrial machine to survive. He was learning to make shoes, identify plants, track animals. He was also reading classics in their original languages, Spanish, German.
So the goal initially wasn't terrorism, it was just escape.
Self-sufficiency. If he could sustain himself, he didn't need the system. If he didn't need the system, he was free. That was the logic.
But the machine kept coming.
That's the tragedy of it, in his eyes. You can leave the city, but the city follows you. He had a sanctuary. It was a plateau with a waterfall about 2 days' hike from his cabin.
The one place he felt at peace.
It was deeply remote. It was the one place he felt true peace, where he felt the world was as it should be, the pre-industrial world.
And in 1983, he hikes out there, expecting silence.
And he finds a road.
Just paved right through it.
A logging road. They had carved right through the middle of his sanctuary. He stood there and saw this scar on the landscape. He later said, "You just can't imagine how upset I was." That was the snap.
That was the moment.
That was the moment he realized, you cannot hide. There is no place deep enough in the woods where technology won't find you.
So if you can't hide, you have to fight.
That was the conclusion. He decided that simply acquiring wilderness skills was a defensive measure, and defense wasn't working. He needed to go on the offensive. He decided to switch from acquiring survival skills to acquiring killing skills.
Let's talk about the campaign, because when people hear Unabomber, they think of the fear, but they might not realize how long this went on. 1978 to 1995. 17 years.
A 17-year, low-grade war against society.
Yeah.
And the evolution of his capability is frightening. The FBI called him the junkyard bomber at first.
Why that name?
His first device, sent to a professor at Northwestern in 1978, was basically a wooden box filled with match heads. It didn't even explode properly. It just flared up and caused minor burns to the security guard who opened it. It was primitive.
He was learning on the job.
He was treating murder like a science experiment. His journals record them as Experiment 97, Experiment 244. He was refining his chemical mixtures, testing different types of wood for shrapnel.
He was iterating.
By 1979, just a year later, he targets American Airlines Flight 444.
This one was particularly terrifying because of the randomness.
Yeah.
A lot of his targets were specific CEOs, scientists.
Yeah.
But a commercial airliner.
He put a bomb in the cargo hold triggered by a barometer. It was designed to detonate when the plane reached a certain altitude. Thankfully, the mechanism was faulty. The mixture wasn't quite right.
What happened?
It smoked. It just filled the cabin with toxic fumes and forced an emergency landing. But authorities said later that if it had detonated as intended, it would have blown the tail off the plane. Everyone would have died.
And Kaczynski wasn't horrified by that potential.
He was disappointed it failed, but he did note that hitting an airline was too indiscriminate. Not because he cared about the passengers, but because it didn't send a clear enough message.
He wanted his violence to have a point.
He wanted his revenge to be personal. He wanted to punish the people building the system.
Which explains the shift in targets. Computer store owners, executives, lobbyists.
Right. Hugh Scruton, a computer store owner in Sacramento, was the first fatality in 1985. Kaczynski left a bomb disguised as a piece of scrap wood in the parking lot.
Just lying there.
Yeah. Scruton picked it up to move it, and it detonated. It was a nail and splinter bomb. Horrific.
Then Thomas Mosser in 1994. Why him?
Mosser was an executive at Burson Marsteller, a big PR firm. Kaczynski hated him because his firm had managed the public relations for Exxon after the Valdez oil spill.
So in Kaczynski's mind, Mosser was cleaning up the mess of the industrial machine.
He saw Mosser as a professional liar for the industrial complex, someone whose job was to make environmental destruction palatable to the public.
And the whole time, he's playing games with the FBI, the FC, signature, Freedom Club. He stamped it on the metal parts of the bombs that wouldn't disintegrate. He wanted the FBI to think there was a massive underground organization. He wanted them to chase a conspiracy.
When really, it was just one guy in a shack melting metal on a wood stove.
One guy.
Yeah.
He was a master of disinformation. He would put notes in the bombs with random letters like woo or RV just to send the profilers chasing ghosts.
He was actively misleading them.
Actively. He used Eugene O'Neill stamps on the packages to make them think he was a literary type, which he was, but not in the way they thought. He embedded a bomb in a novel called Ice Brothers. He was taunting them.
And the FBI was struggling. They spent $50 million. They had 150 agents on it. And for years, they were looking for a blue-collar airplane mechanic.
Completely the wrong profile.
Yeah.
Because of the scrap metal, they saw the junk components, the wood, the lamp cords, the batteries, and thought mechanic or handyman. They didn't see the genius engineering required to make junk lethal.
They missed the mathematician entirely. Because the profile didn't fit the materials. They were looking at the what, not the who.
Until Kaczynski made his biggest move. The manifesto.
Industrial Society and Its Future, 35,000 words. In 1995, he sends letters to the New York Times and the Washington Post. He makes a deal.
A demand.
He says, "Publish this essay verbatim, and I will desist from terrorism. I reserve the right to commit sabotage, but I will stop killing."
Talk about a deal with the devil. Janet Reno and the FBI had to make a really tough call here. Do we give a terrorist a global platform?
It was agonizing. There was a huge debate, but they decided yes. Not to appease him, but because they hoped that if they published it, someone somewhere would recognize the voice.
It was a long shot.
It was a gamble on linguistic recognition, a total Hail Mary.
And let's dig into the manifesto, because it's easy to dismiss it as the ramblings of a madman, but it's actually a very structured, coherent argument.
It is. It's a synthesis of Jacques Ellul, Desmond Morris, and other academics he read in the Lincoln Public Library. His central thesis revolves around what he calls the power process.
Okay, can you break that down? Because I think this is the core of why his ideas still circulate today.
Right. So Kaczynski argues that human beings have a biological need to work toward goals that are essential for survival: food, shelter, warmth, safety. When you work for these things, when you hunt the deer, build the cabin, chop the wood, and you succeed, you feel a deep chemical satisfaction. You have purpose.
You're engaged in the power process.
You are, but technology solves those problems for us. I don't have to hunt for dinner. I order Uber Eats. I don't build my house. I rent an apartment.
Right.
Exactly. Technology removes the struggle for survival. And Kaczynski argues that this creates a void. We still have the biological drive to achieve, but no real survival goals to apply it to. So we are bored. We feel purposeless.
So we invent new goals.
We invent what he calls surrogate activities.
Surrogate activities.
Artificial goals: sports, hobbies, political activism, scientific research, climbing the corporate ladder. We obsess over getting a promotion or getting a high score in a video game or perfecting our golf swing.
Things that don't actually matter for survival.
We pour our energy into these things to simulate the power process. But Kaczynski says these are ultimately unfulfilling because deep down, we know they aren't real. They are just distractions from the meaninglessness of modern life.
It hits a little close to home. It makes you look at your hobbies differently.
It's an uncomfortable insight. And he argues that because the system has to regulate everything to keep this complex technology running, Individual freedom is impossible. You can't have a technological society without massive bureaucracy and control. You need traffic lights, you need tax codes, you need surveillance.
So reform is impossible.
That's his conclusion. You can't fix the system, you have to destroy it.
He also spends a weird amount of time attacking the left, which is confusing to people because environmentalism is usually associated with the left.
This is a key distinction. Kaczynski hated the left. He devoted a huge section of the manifesto to psychoanalyzing leftism. He argued that leftists are driven by feelings of inferiority and over-socialization. He thought they were obsessed with policing language and behavior because they felt weak and guilty.
So he's not an eco-warrior in the traditional sense.
No, but he wasn't a right-winger either. He explicitly rejected eco-fascism and the far right. He called Nazism evil and fascism a kook ideology.
He hated conservatives too, didn't he?
He called them fools. Fools for trying to preserve traditional values while enthusiastically supporting the economic growth and technology that destroys those very values.
So he was truly an army of one. He alienated everyone.
He was a purist, and paradoxically, it was the intellectual depth and the specific phrasing of that manifesto that caught him.
Enter David Kaczynski.
The brother. Now, David's wife, Linda, was actually the one who nudged him first. She had been suspicious for a while.
Who made her suspicious?
Just the rhetoric. She read excerpts of the manifesto in the paper and said, David, the tone, the ideas, it sounds like Ted. David didn't want to believe it. He remembered gentle Ted, the guy who rescued rabbits in childhood.
But he went into the attic, didn't he?
He did. He dug up old letters Ted had written to newspapers in the 70s complaining about technology, and the writing was identical. But not just the handwriting or the general ideas, it was the phrasing. This is where forensic linguistics cracked the case.
The phrase, eat your cake and have it too.
Right. Most of us say, you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's the common idiom. But Kaczynski used the older, historically correct inversion, you can't eat your cake and have it too. It was in the manifesto, and it was in his old letters.
It was his linguistic fingerprint.
That's what James R. Fitzgerald, the FBI profiler, called it. It was a match.
So David is in an impossible position. He loves his brother, but he knows his brother is a serial killer. And he knows if he turns him in, Ted likely faces the electric chair.
It's an unimaginable choice. The family hired a private investigator and a lawyer. They wanted to approach the FBI, but they were terrified of a Ruby Ridge or Waco scenario. They didn't want to shoot out at the cabin.
They wanted to bring him in alive.
They wanted guarantees of safety, and they wanted to try to ensure he wouldn't get the death penalty. They were trying to do the right thing, carefully.
But secrets don't last in Washington.
No. The name leaked to CBS News. The FBI had to move fast before Kaczynski got wind of it and destroyed evidence or rigged the cabin to blow.
And on April 3, 1996, they raided the cabin.
Quietly. They sent a forest ranger to lure him out under the pretense of a property dispute.
And they found the mother lode.
Everything. A live bomb under the bed ready to be mailed, the original typed manuscript of the manifesto, and the journals describing every crime in code.
The code? We haven't talked about the encryption.
Right, so he developed two cipher systems, code number 1 and code number 2. Code number 2 was a one-time pad system. For the non-cryptographers listening, a one-time pad is theoretically unbreakable if you don't have the key.
Military-grade stuff.
Absolutely. The FBI never would have cracked it if they hadn't found the notebook with the key right there in the cabin.
If he had just burned that one notebook, we might never have known the full extent of his crimes.
We wouldn't. It shows the duality of the man. He's living in a shack, looking like a hermit, but he's using military-grade encryption to document a sophisticated terror campaign.
So he's caught, he's in custody,
Yeah.
And now comes the final battle, the trial. Or rather, the trial that never happened.
Insanity versus ideology. This was the conflict. The defense lawyers looked at the evidence, the bombs, the journals, the manifesto, and said, Ted, there is no way we win on the facts. The only way we save your life is to plead insanity. We have to tell the jury you are a paranoid schizophrenic.
And for Kaczynski, that was a fate worse than death.
Much worse. If he is labeled insane, then his manifesto is just the ravings of a lunatic. It invalidates his life's work.
It takes away his agency.
It takes away everything he values. If he is sane, then he is a revolutionary martyr who fought for a cause. He fought his lawyers tooth and nail. He tried to fire them. He tried to represent himself. He even attempted suicide in his cell.
Not out of guilt.
No, specifically to escape being labeled mentally ill. He would rather die than be called crazy.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. But eventually, the judge denied his request to represent himself. Cornered, Kaczynski agreed to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty and accepted life without parole.
He was sent to ADX Lawrence, the Supermax. And this is the part that sounds like bad fan fiction.
Yeah.
He ended up on Bomber's Row.
It is surreal. His neighbors were Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, and Ramzi Yousef, one of the 1993 World Trade Center bombers.
That is the darkest lunch table in history. What do they talk about?
They couldn't see each other, but they could talk through the vents and during the 1 hour of recreation in separate cages. Kaczynski actually liked McVeigh personally. They talked about survivalism, religion, politics.
So they were friends.
They had a rapport, but, and this is so classic Kaczynski, he critiqued McVeigh's work.
He critiqued the bombing.
He told McVeigh that the Oklahoma City bombing was sloppy and unnecessarily inhumane. He thought the body count was too high and too indiscriminate.
The man who put a bomb on a passenger plane.
He looked down on McVeigh as a blunt instrument, whereas Kaczynski saw himself as a surgical scalpel.
Talk about pot calling the kettle black.
Right. But it reinforces his self-image. He wasn't a terrorist in his own mind. He was a resistance fighter.
He spent decades there. He kept writing. He corresponded with people. The government even auctioned off his personal items, his hoodie, his sunglasses, his typewriter, to pay restitution to the victims.
That auction raised over $232,000. It highlights the strange, dark fascination we have with him. People bought the Unabomber's sunglasses. It's grotesque, but it shows how deeply he embedded himself in the culture.
And then we reached the end. June 10th, 2023.
He had been diagnosed with late-stage rectal cancer in 2021. He was transferred to a medical center. He stopped treatment in March 2023. And in June, he was found unresponsive in his cell.
Suicide.
Yes. He hanged himself with a shoelace. He decided when he left the party, autonomy until the very last second.
So, Ted Kaczynski is dead. But the uncomfortable reality is, his ideas aren't.
No, in fact, if you look online, his ideas are arguably more popular now than when he was alive. You see Unabomber quotes on TikTok. You have serious academics revisiting his warnings about technology.
Why? Why does a murderer resonate with Gen Z or with modern intellectuals?
Because the anxiety he tapped into has, in many ways, come true. He predicted that technology would become a self-perpetuating system that we can't control.
There's a famous quote from Bill Joy, right?
Yes, Bill Joy was the co-founder of Sun Microsystems, a literal giant of the tech industry. In 2000, he wrote a famous article for Wired magazine called Why the Future Doesn't Need Us, and he quoted Kaczynski.
He quoted the Unabomber in Wired.
He did. He wrote that while Kaczynski is a murderer and a Luddite, simply saying this does not dismiss his argument.
That is the thought that lingers. We are living in the world Kaczynski predicted. Algorithms predict our behavior. AI is threatening our sense of purpose. We are more connected and yet more lonely than ever. We are engaged in surrogate activities on our screens constantly.
It makes you wonder, if the walking brain from Evergreen Park High School could see us now doom-scrolling on our phones, tracking our sleep with watches, terrified of the AI revolution, would he be surprised?
I don't think so. I think he'd look at us and say, I told you so.
And the tragedy, the true tragedy, is that a mind that brilliant felt the only way to make us listen was to destroy innocent people. He had the intellect to perhaps solve these problems, but he chose to become part of the destruction.
That is the heavy reality of this story. It's a deep dive that forces us to look in the mirror. Thanks for listening.
Stay curious. And maybe, seriously, leave your phone at home next time you go for a walk in the woods.
Solid advice. See you next time.